Hello and welcome to Roportaj. This is Danish bin Nabi. Swati Narayan has come up with a brilliant research in form of a book titled Unequal. The book is published by Westland Books. The research is about how Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka have gone ahead of India as far as the Human Development Index indicators are concerned, despite being the smaller economies than India. Her research also shows how South India has developed much more than the North India and how the successive governments in North India have worked basically for the welfare of the people. And on the other hand, how successive governments in the North India have miserably failed. Swati's research also busts many myths about India's development. More from the author. Swati, before we go to the contents of the book, there are total number of 351 pages. Out of these 351 pages, the last chapter ends at page number 198. For the rest of 150 to 170 pages, there are graphs, bibliography, notes, footnotes, everything. Explain for the viewers how much research and how much time has gone into this book.
Thank you so much, Danish, for having me. And it actually did take an extremely long time. My PhD was officially for 5 years. It's been another 4 years after that because of COVID delays and me rewriting many drafts of the book to make it accessible to a general audience. And I'll be very honest with you, if I'd not done the 10 years of work before that, I don't think I would have done a PhD in 5 years of work. So yes, a long, long time.
So roughly I can say 5 years?
5 years was the PhD, but I would say if you take buffer, 10 years minimum.
Minimum 10 years only to write down 198 pages.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Now let's dive into the book.
Sure.
You have mentioned in your research that Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka are way ahead of as far as the Human Development Index is concerned than India, especially the state of Bihar, because you write in the research, you say that Bihar is very close culturally, traditionally, politically to Nepal and Bangladesh. So why
That's right.
have they done good as far as this development, especially the food, health, and education is concerned? And why has India failed in uplifting its poor people?
Right. So there are many arguments for why this could have happened. And it's very interesting in this contrast because Bihar shares an open border with Nepal and is very close proximity to Bangladesh. So it is a comparison of similar areas. But if you ask me in one word, what is the reason? I would say extreme inequality in Bihar, which also is there all over India. And these inequalities of caste, class, and gender compound one another, which is what makes it worse. So Baba Sahib Ambedkar speaks about graded inequality, which is a uniquely Indian phenomenon.
You have mentioned three important things in the book. That's caste, class, and gender. And you have mentioned that how basically Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, they have almost curbed these three factors, which are very important for the human development. Why has India, being such a great country, being such a great economy, why has India failed in curbing these three factors?
So one of the things I do in the book is not speak of India as a whole, but speak about states within India and perhaps to a certain extent, North and Southern India. And one of the biggest things that we see, for example, in the states in India which have done well in human development and our neighbors, is that there have been, for example, anti-caste movements in order to reduce caste inequalities. There have been government policies to ensure that class inequality is reduced. So public services, education, healthcare, nutrition. And lastly, for gender inequalities, for example, Bangladesh has a female secondary stipend program that helps girls to stay in school. So because of these concerted efforts, and I'm only looking at three aspects of inequality. There are many more. There are religious inequalities, ethnic inequalities. But what I found very interesting is in all the areas where human development is better, inequalities, there have been concerted efforts to reduce inequalities, both by the states and citizens fighting for their rights against discrimination, against these inequalities.
One of the important things you have mentioned at the start of this book is about this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan.
Yeah.
How, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi started this Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, it was only way back in 2011 that Bangladesh has already curbed these toilet problems. Explain it for the viewers. What have your experiences in Bangladesh?
Right. So even before I started my PhD, for many years I've been traveling to Bangladesh because I used to work with NGOs. And I was always fascinated with why were there cement rings, which I used to see in the villages. And then I realized that the local government, was giving these cement rings to poor families to build toilets. There were also many other efforts like this community-led total sanitation, where people are made aware of the fact of the problems of defecating in the open. So 10 years before Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the government of Bangladesh made a concerted effort with civil society to ensure that there was no open defecation. So this is one aspect of it. But also in my research, I found that Islam has a hadith on the etiquette of hygiene. So this has been something that Bangladeshis respect a lot in terms of ensuring that not only that there is no open defecation, but there is privacy, there are toilets. So it's culturally also enforced apart from being enforced by the government. So this is 10 years before Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. 94% of households, including those that I interviewed, had a functional toilet that everybody was using. And even after Swachh, sorry.
Yeah. Please carry on.
Even after Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, we find that in India, in the northern states, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, etc., 50% of households today are still not using toilets, even if they've constructed toilets.
In this great research, when you talk about toilets, you have mentioned about Nepal, how Nepal has given these toilet cards. If you do not build the toilet at your home, they don't give you the government facilities like the death certificates, like the birth certificates. Why can't we replicate such examples in the India?
So I did write about that. I found that in one village development council in Nepal. And Nepal, the government at 2016 had set a deadline that they have to be free of open defecation. But this is not something that I would necessarily recommend in India. It's quite draconian to say that I won't give you services if you don't have a toilet. I don't think that's fair on citizens. But I think there was one good thing that Bihar did. In Bihar, when I was traveling there, I was also struggling without toilets, right? But the Bihar government had said that politicians, if you want to stand for elections, you should have a toilet in your house. So I think we can put pressure on politicians, not on all citizens.
And what was this with these toilet papers when you were traveling in Bangladesh? You have written about it, how these small business units were making these toilet papers. Explain for the viewers, what about these toilet papers?
So normally in South Asian culture, we use water. And I was seeing these toilet rolls in these very poor villages of Bangladesh and very cheap. 10 taka, 15 taka for a toilet roll. And it was also called Bangla toilet roll. I was wondering who uses this. And I thought maybe there are some Western people in the villages and I couldn't find any. So I kept thinking about it for a long time. I'd not seen it in India also. And then I realized the importance of Islamic cultural influence when one mother, she had her infant twin children. So she told me that I'm a good Muslim because I ensured that there is hygiene for my children. So I use both water and toilet paper. So this is written in the Quran. That you either use sand or you use other materials to ensure hygiene. If there's no water, then you use sand.
Not sand, but soil.
You tell me. Soil, yeah. So I realized this religion can be an important influence for good hygienic practices also.
Coming to the education now. In the book, you have given examples from Nepal, you have given examples from Bangladesh, and you mentioned that how women, especially the women folk in these 80 villages where you have gone, they were much aware than the women than their counterparts in Bihar. You have also mentioned about that one example where that couple had come to Bihar from Nepal, and they had a patient who had a liver cirrhosis, and the how health Medicare was cheap in Nepal as compared to Bihar. Explain this story, explain this dynamics of the health comparison between Bihar and Nepal.
Sure. And I also teach public health. So we know that in India, one of the most neglected aspects is healthcare. And you see the most extreme aspect of that in Bihar, where even if you have a health center, where in many places I didn't find, especially in the border areas, the health center will not have medicines. So the biggest fear of people is falling sick in Bihar. And the family that you mentioned, somebody had, and it was a particularly, I would say, Dalits or Domes or Musahars in Bihar, struggle with healthcare because there's the second layer of discrimination, even if they reach a healthcare center, that they face from health workers. So in that family, in Bihar, alcohol is prohibited, but you have spurious liquor flowing everywhere, in the black market. So the person had died of liver cirrhosis. But even Dome families find that it's cheaper for them to cross the border. The border is open to Nepal, go there, and the Nepali government has this thing called health posts. So from hospitals all the way to these small places called health posts or primary healthcare clinics, healthcare is not only free, it is actually available. Medicines are there. So even, for example, journalist M.N. Parth, he has written of families from Uttar Pradesh regularly using the open border and going to Nepal for their healthcare. But with COVID, the borders were closed. So these families suffered a lot. And this shows you, I mean, Nepal's constitution was written in 2015. It's a new constitution that guarantees the right to health. In India, we haven't done that.
And you have also mentioned in 2015 there was a blockade by the economic blockade by India of Nepal. And then you write, when you again went to Nepal, how hostile they were to you, because only because that the medical equipments they had fall short, very short in Nepal, and all these things you have mentioned in the book. Coming back to Bihar, has the Bihar government, especially the Nitish government in last 20 years, has Bihar government failed its people?
I don't want to speak of individual governments, but I think overall we can say a succession of governments in Bihar and in India have failed their people to respect our basic rights to education, healthcare, nutrition. And in Bihar in particular, because it is not only the poorest, it's also backward across social indicators. So Nitish Kumar government, for example, has tried some things and even those have failed. I'll give you an example. They tried this degree lao naukri pao, right, to fill up teacher vacancies in schools. But there has been the mass, I mean, I'm talking around 20 to 50,000 fake certificates that they have found of these people who enrolled themselves as teachers, got the jobs as teachers, but are now not able to teach. So there is a collapse of the education system and mass education, particularly in Bihar. So sometimes it is a government's failure, of course, but also the fact that there are feudalism, there's caste monopolies, and education has always been monopolized by the upper caste. So Bihar is an extreme version of it, and women in Bihar, 43% of women in Bihar are not literate. So women bear the maximum burden, especially in Musahar hamlets, where the literacy rate is 21%. Yeah.
I completely get the point. Before we move to South, I must ask you a question. You have taken examples, you have taken research from Sri Lanka, from neighboring countries, Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, from Nepal. Why have you missed on Pakistan? Was any particular reasons?
Right.
Because
So I
I would
started.
have because people would have loved to compare basically India with Pakistan, because obviously given our uh, political history.
That's right. Like I write in the book, I think that's largely a distraction. And I'll explain to you why. Pakistan is poorer than us. But on all the social indicators, it also does worse than India. We know that over these last 20, 30 years, whether it is education, healthcare, nutrition, literacy rates, mortality rates, it's been doing worse. So, what is the point of comparison when we know they're poorer and doing worse? The interesting part with
Is
Bangladesh and Nepal,
Yeah,
sorry,
please
the
go on.
interesting part with Bangladesh and Nepal is they're poorer, but they're doing better on female literacy, life expectancy, infant mortality, and many other indicators, child nutrition. So this is the far more interesting comparison. We anyway know Pakistan is doing badly. Why compare with somebody who's doing worse? Compare with somebody who's doing better. And Sri Lanka, Maldives, Bhutan, all are doing better than us.
Swati, Pakistan is doing poorer than us. It's not doing better than us. Is this your opinion, or is this argument based on any research, any data that you have gone through?
Oh, absolutely. This is based on publicly available data. So the same data that I used for this
And
research.
you have gone through this data.
Absolutely. So
And
Pakistan's
Pakistan is doing very worse than us
across parameters. The only
based on the
parameter
data, based on the research.
based on pure data. Yes.
Swati, point well taken. Now let's move to South.
Sure.
One of the important factors which I, after reading the book, is about the social movements. Bihar has seen large number of social movements. So has South, especially Tamil Nadu and Kerala, which you have mentioned in the book. Explain for the viewers why social movements were successful in South and why did they fail in North?
Right. So, firstly, it is a long history of social movements in the South. So, in the southern states, what we find is that even 1 century ago, 100 years ago, there's been a long history of these social movements. And the spark of social movements usually is with increase in literacy. So, once a population is aware that they're getting exploited, that they can fight for their rights, and aware of international influences, even just merely through education, that usually sparks social movements. Now, in the South, actually, the reason for high literacy was that the princely states, especially in Kerala of Travancore and Cochin, were investing in education. The royal restrictive education was done by the Maharani of Travancore. Um, so education was one reason, and they have a longer history than Bihar. But I need to qualify that caste inequalities in Kerala were worse than perhaps Bihar in a way, because not only did you have untouchability, you had unseeability. And a lower caste, supposedly lower caste person.
One of the main questions about this casteism in South, one of the important things you have mentioned in the book is about the breast tax.
Yes.
Yeah, kindly explain that too with the same question.
Right. So apart from the fact that there was unseeability, that is, the marginalized castes were not allowed, the upper castes were not even supposed to lay their eyes on anybody lower than them, so-called lower. Women were so exploited that especially women from marginalized castes were not allowed to cover themselves about the waist. And in fact, if women covered themselves, they had to pay a breast tax. It was as inhumane as that. And these parts of Kerala's history have now been deleted from even NCRT textbooks. So it is when I started investigation into this, I realized that most Malayalis or most Keralites are fully aware of this dark chapter of history. But it was only because of women's movements and anti-caste movements, and the one I focus on is this Chanar upper cloth revolt, which continued for 60 years. So marginalized caste women and men fought for the right to women to be able to wear the clothing that they wanted to wear. Um, Many other books have written about this, but the one that I focus on is one I found in the British archives and in the Indian archives, written by Yeshudas. It is called A People's Revolt in Travancore, and he documents how it was not only the influence of literacy, but also them looking for example, their sisters in or their family members in Tamil Nadu and realizing women can wear whatever clothing they want to. So women fought for 50 years, lower caste women, for the right to wear clothing. If we forget this, then, or if we remember this, we can understand how Musahar women in Bihar today can also fight. But those movements, because of low literacy, haven't been sparked. Even today, literacy rates of Musahars are so low, even though their population is more than 2 million.
You have also mentioned about your grandmother when you had a discussion with her on this breast text, and you say that she was knowing this, but she had not told you all these things. Tell the viewers about this conversation between you and your grandmother.
Right. So my grandmother actually grew up in Travancore before independence, and then Trivandrum, as it was called. But my family for 3 generations is in Mumbai, Bombay, Mumbai. So I never grew up in Kerala, and I didn't know so much about its social history. So it's not only about forgetting dark chapters of our history, but I realized that even families like to forget. Who wants to talk about the fact that women were not allowed to cover themselves, right? So when I asked, I found this book in the library, actually in the National Archives in Delhi for the first time. I couldn't believe what I was reading because it's not there in our textbooks, and I didn't grow up with
Same
this.
was the case with me. When I read about this breast text, I couldn't believe what you have written.
Precisely. And so I asked her this simple question, why didn't you tell me all this? And I guess she also didn't, she wanted to cover it up. So she said, you never asked. And we've had some conversations afterwards, and I realized my entire extended family knows about this. They just never spoke about it.
And importantly, the important thing which not important, very interesting thing that you write in the book is about Tipu Sultan. When he conquered the North Kerala, he basically abolished this thing. So explain this bit for this Tipu Sultan thing for the viewers.
Right. So this is also something I found in Yeshudas's book, where he says that when Tipu Sultan conquered northern parts of Kerala, he was so appalled by this, and also the fact that Muslim women, it is important to cover yourself. So he banished this in the areas that he conquered, whereas it still continued. And it required anti-caste movements, women and men from Dalit communities. And it was not only Dalits, it was even the Nayars, and even the queen herself was not allowed to cover herself if she went to the temple. So it has been a struggle for women's movements that's been hidden and should not be hidden.
But again, the irony is the women succeeded in North, but they miserably failed succeeded in South and miserably failed in North. Why? How can we explain this shift? That in one part they have succeeded and in other part they are still the same and nothing has changed for them.
Well, I think that because I look at long time of history, I don't think we should say women in the North have failed. It's just that perhaps if we give women in the North another 100 years, I'd like to look at it positively and say, if these lessons are learned or if greater literacy is increased among women, women will continue to fight for better lives. Every generation, I have got freedoms that my grandmother didn't have. So I know that every generation of women and fights for more than the previous generation. But that said, I would like to say that patriarchy is so acute, and so is feudalism and casteism in the North today. And one reason for that is upper caste domination. So, for example, I speak also in Bihar of in the 90s, you had these private militias. the Ranveer Sena, the Bhumiyar Sena, and
Which
all
has
created
killed
by the
Dalit
upper
like
caste.
anything. Yeah, it's mentioned in the book.
Precisely. And the Ranveer Sena focuses on femicide, on killing Dalit women, and also rapes. And this was in the 90s. The reason being, they wanted to ensure that not only Dalit men, but also those who joined the Naxal cadres were not given birth to. So women are fighting triple oppression, especially lower caste women in Bihar: caste oppression, class oppression, and gender oppression. So it is acutely difficult.
And it's very important for the women to give education to the women, because if you give education, if you educate a woman, she educates a household, an entire household, and then it's the baby step which obviously has ripple effects on the society. Now, coming back to South, explain the importance of Sri Lanka, because in the book, Sri Lanka falls states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu. In the book, you have written that Sri Lankan women in South Asia were the first who voted. They were first from
To get
US
the right.
as well as from UK, right?
That's right.
The first women prime minister was also, world's women prime minister was also from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka in 1912 gave men the rights to vote. So how basically has Sri Lanka influenced Kerala and Tamil Nadu as far as this Human Development Index is concerned?
So Sri Lanka, what we find is even 100 years ago. So I start from the 1820s in terms of research of Sri Lanka and Kerala. And even at that time, Sri Lanka had a higher rate of education than even Kerala, which was the most advanced in India. And one reason for that is it was not only the British, it was also the Dutch, the Portuguese. So Sri Lanka has had several waves of colonization, and also the Buddhist influence of having the Pirivenas, which were these, network of schools for education. So most you find these reformatory movements start with education. So women's education was higher. And the other interesting thing is international alliances. So there were waves, even the British by that time were having the suffragette movement where British women and women in the US fought for 100 years for the right to vote. I was also very lucky that I got to spend 1 year at LSE, which has the storehouse of this 100 years of struggle in something called a women's library. So I was searching in that library and I found that British women were supporting Sri Lankan women and Indian women so that when India and Sri Lanka got independence, women would automatically get the right to vote. But in Sri Lanka's case, there was something called the Daanish Commission that went from Britain to Sri Lanka to write a new constitution even before independence. They knew they were going to give independence to Sri Lanka, but they started the welfare state with the Daanish Commission. And one of the founders of LSE, who was the Sydney and Beatrice Webb, he was at that time influential in influencing Fabian socialism ideals in this Daanish Commission. So delegations of Sri Lankan women who were already educated were arguing with the British commissioners who came to Sri Lanka in Colombo, saying that you have to give us the right to vote. If you have to give us the right to own property. We have to make laws that will influence us. And so they even reduced the voting age to 18.
And this is 1908.
Yes. No, so women in Sri Lanka got the right to vote in 1931, just 3 years after British women. And they were all part of this International Suffragette Alliance.
My last question before we end up this interesting discussion.
Sure.
There is a large divide between North and South, education-wise, health-wise, caste-wise, class-wise. Do you see this gap shrinking anytime soon?
It can shrink and it will shrink if we want it to shrink. And I think this is a collective responsibility of not only governments, but us as citizens to demand our rights. That's what the social history shows us. Will it shrink? Can it shrink? Of course it can. But if extreme exploitation, upper caste exploitation, patriarchal exploitation, feudal exploitation continues, if there is no land reform, if there is no expansion of education, if there are no welfare services, it will not happen. So it requires enlightened governments, enlightened citizens. It can happen and will happen, I hope, in the next 100 years.
And it's the people who basically have to fight for their rights.
Absolutely. Right to vote and for our rights.
Swati, absolutely amazing talking to you. Let me hold this book once again for the viewers so that it reaches maximum people. Please do read this Unequal by Swati Narayan. Thank you, Swati. Thank you very much for talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Daanish, and for your post-it notes.
Please subscribe to our channel Roportaj and press the bell icon to remain updated.